A doubting Thomas is a skeptic who refuses to believe without direct personal experience, a reference to the Apostle Thomas, who refused to believe that the resurrected Jesus had appeared to the 10 other apostles, until he could see and feel the wounds received by Jesus on the cross. In art, the episode has been frequently depicted since at least the 5th century, with its depiction reflecting a range of theological interpretations. Gospel account. The episode is related in the Gospel of John, though not in the 3 synoptic Gospels. The King James Version text is 24. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. 25. The other disciples therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. 26. And after 8 days again his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace unto you. 27. Then saith he to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust into my side, and be not faithless but believing. 28. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. 29. Jesus saith unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed they that have not seen, and have believed. Commentators have noted that John avoids saying whether Thomas actually did thrust his hand in. Before the Protestant Reformation, the usual belief, reflected in artistic depictions, was that he had done so, which most Catholic writers continued to believe, while Protestant writers often thought that he had not, regardless of the question of whether Thomas had felt as well as seen the physical evidence of the resurrection of Jesus. The Catholic interpretation was that, although Jesus asserts the superiority of those who have faith without physical evidence, he was nonetheless willing to show Thomas his wound, and let him feel it. This was used by theologians as biblical encouragement for the use of physical experiences such as pilgrimages, veneration of relics and ritual in reinforcing Christian beliefs. Protestant theologians emphasized Jesus' statement of the superiority of faith alone, although the evangelical-leaning Anglican Thomas Hartwell, in his widely read Introduction to the Critical Study and Knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, treated Thomas's incredulity, which he extended somewhat to the other apostles, approvingly, as evidence both of the veracity of the Gospels, as a forger would be unlikely to have invented it, and of the proper suspicion of the seemingly impossible, demonstrating the reliability as witnesses. In the early church, Gnostic authors were very insistent that Thomas did not actually examine Jesus, and elaborated on this in apocryphal accounts, perhaps tending to push the non-Gnostic opponents in the other direction. The theological interpretation of the episode has concentrated on it as a demonstration of the reality of the resurrection, but as early as the writings of the 4th and 5th century saints John Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria, it had been given a Eucharistic interpretation, seen as an allegory of the sacrament of the Eucharist. What remained a recurring theme in commentary. Art. In art, this subject, formerly termed the incredulity of St. Thomas, has been common since at least the early 6th century, when it appears in the mosaics at Basilica of Sant'Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna, and on the Monza Ampelai. In those depictions, as later in the Baroque, the subject, normally depicted at the moment Thomas puts his fingers into Jesus' side, was used to emphasize the importance of physical experiences and evidences for the believer, as described above. The Ravenna mosaic introduces the motif of Jesus raising his hand high to reveal the wound in his side. His pose often, but not always, is such that the wounds on his hands can can also be seen, and often those on his feet as well. The scene was used in a number of contexts in medieval art, including Byzantine icons, where there was room. All the apostles were often shown, and sometimes Thomas' acceptance of the resurrection is shown, with Thomas kneeling and Jesus blessing him. This iconography leaves it unclear whether the moment shown follows an examination or not, but probably suggests that it does not, especially in Protestant art. For the late Middle Ages onwards, a number of variations of the poses of the two figures occur. The typical, touching representation formed one of a number of scenes sometimes placed around a central crucifixion of Jesus, and is one of the scenes shown on the Irish Muirdark's High Cross, and the subject of a large relief in the famous Romanesque sculpted cloister at the Abbey of Santo Domingo de Silos. In works showing pairs of typologically related scenes from the Old and New Testaments, it could be paired with Jacob wrestling with the angel, but in a 10th century Ottonian ivory diptych it is paired with Moses receiving the law, comparing both the two biblical testaments and the support for the faith from both textual sacred writ and physical evidences. In the later Middle Ages, Jesus with one side of his robe pulled back displaying the wound in his side and his other for wounds, was taken from images with Thomas and turned into a pose adopted by Jesus alone, who often places his own fingers into the wound in his side. This form became a common feature of single iconic figures of Jesus and subjects such as the Last Judgment, Christ in Majesty, the Man of Sorrows, and Christ with the Armor Christi, and was used to emphasize Christ's suffering as well as the fact of his resurrection. In the Renaissance, the famous sculpted pair of Christ and Saint Thomas by Andrea del Verrocchio for the Orson Michele in Florence is the best-known representation. The subject is rare in freestanding sculpture. This guild church also housed commercial tribunals, and the presentation of physical evidence gave the subject a particular relevance to courts and justice, and it appeared on many other buildings in Tuscany with judicial functions. The Medici family, heavily involved in the commission, also had a particular association with St. Thomas. The subject enjoyed a revival in popularity in Counter-Reformation art as an assertion of Catholic doctrine against Protestant rejection of the Catholic practices which the episode was held to support, and Protestant belief in faith alone. In the Catholic interpretation, although Jesus asserts the superiority of those who have faith without physical evidence, he was nonetheless willing to show Thomas his wound and let him feel it. The incredulity of St. Thomas by Caravaggio is now the most famous depiction, but there are many others, especially by the Utrecht Caravaggisti, painting in a Protestant environment. Both Rembrandt and Rubens painted it. Gallery. Medieval drama. The dramatic nature of the episode meant that it often featured in medieval drama telling the story of the life of Jesus. It takes the whole of Play 41 of the York Mystery Cycle, probably dating from some time between 1463 and 1477, which takes 195 six-line stanzas to tell it. Other shorter cycles omit it, and the Chester Mystery Plays take 70 lines to cover it. Related legends. The biblical episode generated two late medieval legends or stories, which also appear in art. Girdle of Thomas. In this story, at the Assumption of Mary, where the other apostles were present, Thomas once again missed the occasion. So the Virgin Mary, aware of Thomas' skeptical nature, appeared to him individually and dropped the girdle she was wearing down onto him, to give him a physical proof of what he had seen. In other versions he is present at the actual Assumption, and the Virgin dropped her girdle down to him as she was taken up to heaven. The supposed girdle itself is a relic of Prato Cathedral, and its veneration was regarded as especially helpful for pregnant women. After Florence took control of Prato in 1350–51, the girdle begins to feature in Florentine art and to be shown worn by figures of Madonna del Parto, iconic figures showing the Virgin Mary when pregnant. The first version of the story is called the Madonna of the Girdle in art. An altarpiece by Palma Vecchio, now in the Brera Gallery in Milan, shows an intermediate version, with Thomas hurrying towards the other apostles, and the Virgin taking off her girdle. In other works Thomas is catching the falling girdle, or has received the girdle and holds it. Incredulity of Jerome. St. Francis of Assisi had a vision in 1224, after which he acquired stigmata on his own body, repeating the wounds of Jesus, which he kept until his death. According to the many who saw them, the wounds on his hands and feet were as if the nails still remained in place, and the nail-like projections could be moved. An early biographer of Francis, St. Bonaventure, reported that a soldier called Jerome was skeptical and moved the nails about. Jerome is thought to be shown examining Francis's feet in the frescoes of the Bardi Chapel of Santa Croce, Florence, by Giotto in his workshop, and appears in some other Franciscan works.